The Green Room. The Green Room at NBC's Burbank studio smelled like cigarette smoke and hairspray, and Bruce Lee had been sitting in it for 40 minutes, listening to the muffled sound of the band warming up through the wall. It was the second week of August, 1973. In a few days, posters for Enter the Dragon would be going up outside theaters from Los Angeles to New York. And tonight, for the first time in his life, Bruce Lee was about to walk out in front of the single largest audience an American entertainer could ask for. He had waited a long time for a night like this one. Not to fame. He had already tasted a version of that in Hong Kong, where he could not walk down a street without being recognized, where the big boss and Fist of Fury had broken box office records that had stood for a decade. What he had waited for was this: a chair on an American stage, in front of an American audience, on his own terms, after years of being told, gently and not so gently, that there simply was not room for someone who looked like him at the front of the screen. He remembered pitching a television series a few years earlier, an idea about a wandering martial artist in the old American West, a quiet man who solved problems with patience and skill rather than a gun. The studio liked the idea. They did not, in the end, want him playing the lead. The show went forward without him, with someone else in the role, and Bruce had gone back to his training hall in Los Angeles that night and hit the heavy bag until his knuckles ached. Not from anger exactly, but from the particular frustration of being told, without anyone quite saying it, that the color of his skin mattered more than what he could do. Tonight was supposed to be different. Warner Brothers had put real money behind him. There was talk of a 5-picture deal. And somewhere behind the studio doors, Johnny Carson, a man who had interviewed presidents and astronauts and every major star in America, was getting ready to ask him questions in front of 10 million people. A production assistant knocked twice and leaned her head in. 5 minutes, Mr. Lee. Bruce nodded, stood, and checked his jacket in the mirror one more time. Not out of vanity, but the same way he checked his stance before sparring. Small adjustments. Nothing wasted. He thought briefly of his wife Linda back at the hotel, who had told him that morning not to worry so much about the interview, that he had spent his whole life being underestimated in rooms exactly like this one and had never once failed to change someone's mind by the time he left. He thought of his children, still young enough that they would not remember this particular night even if it went well, though he hoped someday they might see the tape and understand a little of what their father had been fighting for, in rooms far quieter than any of his films. He thought, too, of the long string of almosts that had brought him here, the auditions where he was told he was too Chinese for a role and, in the same year, told by a different casting director that his English wasn't Chinese enough for a different one, as if there were some correct amount of himself he was supposed to be presenting, and he could never quite locate it. He thought of the countless demonstrations he had given for free, in gyms and dojos and studio backlots, to men who wanted proof before they would even consider taking him seriously. Proof he was always, eventually, able to give. Tonight would simply be one more room. He had never lost the habit of walking into a room expecting to have to prove something before anyone would listen to him, and some part of him suspected he never would, however famous he became. A stagehand held the curtain rope and gave him a small nod, the universal signal shared by people who work backstage everywhere. You're on soon, and you'll be fine. Bruce nodded back and rolled his shoulders once, the way he did before any performance, whether it was in front of a camera or an opponent. Out past the curtain, Johnny Carson was midway through his opening monologue, working the crowd with the same loose, unhurried confidence that had made him the most trusted face in late-night television. He made a joke about the price of gasoline. He made a joke about Nixon. The band laughed on cue. The audience laughed because the band laughed, and 400 people in the studio settled into the particular comfortable rhythm of an audience that trusted the man in front of them completely. Backstage, Bruce watched a monitor with the same attention he gave everything, reading Carson's timing, his pauses, the way he let a joke breathe before delivering the next one. It was, in its own way, a kind of martial art. Rhythm, distance, misdirection, the ability to make an entire room move exactly where you wanted it. Our next guest, Carson said, turning toward the curtain with a grin already forming. You may not know his name yet, but I have a feeling you will very soon. He's a martial artist, an actor, and apparently, according to my producers, the fastest pair of hands in the movie business. Please welcome, all the way from Hong Kong, Bruce Lee. The curtain parted. Applause rose, polite, curious, thinner than the ovations reserved for stars America already knew, because most of the room genuinely had not heard the name before. Bruce walked out, shook Carson's hand, and sat. For the first several minutes, it went the way these things usually went. Carson asked about the training, how many hours a day, how long he had been at it, whether it was true he had started as a boy in Hong Kong. Bruce answered plainly, without performance, the way he answered everything. He talked about growing up watching his father on stage in Cantonese opera, about learning Wing Chun from Yip Man as a teenager, about coming to America at 18 with almost nothing and putting himself through school washing dishes and teaching cha-cha lessons on the side. Carson, sharp as always, found the real thread in it. So you came here with nothing, and now you're about to be in every movie theater in the country. That's not exactly the easy road. No, Bruce said, not easy. But nobody asked me if I wanted easy. The audience laughed at that, a real laugh this time, and Bruce allowed himself the smallest smile. For a moment, it seemed like the interview was simply going to be a good one. Warm, a little unexpected, the kind of segment that quietly makes a career. Carson asked about the new film, about what audiences unfamiliar with martial arts films should expect from Enter the Dragon, and Bruce spoke about it the way he spoke about everything connected to his work, carefully, without exaggeration, describing the film as an attempt to show real technique rather than the exaggerated theatrics American audiences associated with the genre. People think fighting in movies has to look impossible to be exciting, he said. I think the opposite. It's more exciting when you believe it could actually happen. And could it? Carson asked, genuinely curious now, leaning forward slightly. Everything in the film, could you actually do all of that? Most of it, Bruce said. Not because I'm special, because I've trained longer than most people are willing to train for anything. He paused. Everyone wants the result. Fewer people want the 20 years before the result. It was a good line, delivered without any attempt to make it sound like one, and it drew a genuine murmur of appreciation from the crowd. The sound an audience makes when a guest says something true rather than something clever. Then Carson leaned back in his chair, glanced sideways at the camera the way he did when he was about to land something for the audience rather than the guest, and smiled. I have to ask you something, and don't take this the wrong way, he said, holding up his hands in mock surrender before he'd even finished the sentence. All this kung fu business, the punches, the speed, all of it, be honest with me and the folks at home. That's mostly camera tricks, isn't it? Slow the film down, sharpen the sound effects, and suddenly a fella your size looks like he could take on the whole room. He grinned, playing to the studio. I've seen the reels. I could probably take you myself. The audience laughed, the easy, comfortable laugh of a crowd, enjoying a host doing exactly what a host is supposed to do, needling a guest just enough to get a rise, without drawing blood. It was, by the standards of 1973 late-night television, a perfectly ordinary joke. Bruce did not laugh. He also did not bristle or scowl or do any of the things a lesser performer might have done to signal offense. He simply looked at Carson with the same calm, complete attention he brought to everything, the look of a man who had heard some version of this joke in 3 different languages from men considerably larger than Carson and had never once needed to raise his voice to answer it. You could try, Bruce said quietly. The studio microphone caught it clean, and something about the stillness underneath the words made the laughter in the room thin out faster than anyone expected. Carson, sensing an opening for a bigger moment rather than backing away from it, because that too was simply who he was, stood up from behind his desk, still grinning, and spread his arms for the room. No, really, he said. Show me something. Right here. I won't even hit back, I promise you that much. There was a pause. The particular kind of pause a live studio audience can feel in its chest before it fully understands why. Bruce rose from his chair, unhurried, the same way he rose from any chair, and stepped into the open space beside Carson's desk, where the band usually stood during transitions. One condition, Bruce said, you throw something real, not a joke punch, a real one, or there's nothing to show. Carson laughed, glanced toward the audience as if to say, watch this, cocked his arm theatrically, and threw a slow, showy roundhouse, built for a laugh line, not for landing. The kind of swing a comedian throws when he wants the audience in on the bit. It never got close. Bruce's hand rose almost lazily, intercepted Carson's wrist a few inches from his own shoulder, redirected it past him with what looked like no effort at all, and in the same unhurried motion, tapped 2 fingers lightly against the center of Carson's chest. Carson took a half step back to catch his balance. It had not hurt in the slightest. That, everyone in the room slowly realized, was exactly the point. "If I wanted this to end differently," Bruce said, his voice even, carrying easily now that the room had gone almost silent, "you would already be sitting down. I don't want that. I want to show you that something works. There's a difference." For a long moment, Carson said nothing, a genuinely rare thing for a man who filled silence for a living, night after night, without ever seeming to notice he was doing it. Then, slowly, he began to laugh again, but differently this time, not performing for the crowd, the real, surprised laugh of a man who has just been shown something he did not expect to be shown, and knows it. "I have interviewed astronauts," Carson said, sitting back down, shaking his head but still smiling. "I have interviewed 3 presidents. Nobody has ever done that to me at my own desk." He extended his hand across the desk. "I'll withdraw the comment about the camera tricks." Bruce shook it. "No apology necessary. You asked a question a lot of people ask, out loud or otherwise. Now you have an answer." He returned to his seat, and the audience, who had gone from laughing at Bruce Lee to laughing with him in under 30 seconds, broke into applause louder than anything the segment had produced so far. The remainder of the interview went differently than it had begun. Carson, visibly recalibrating, asked fewer jokes and more real questions. He asked what it had actually felt like to be told, more than once, that American audiences would not accept an Asian leading man. Bruce answered honestly, without bitterness in his voice, describing years of near misses and doors that opened only partway before closing again. He talked about going back to Hong Kong not because he wanted to leave America, but because it was the only place, for a while, that would let him do the work at all. "So what changed?" Carson asked. "Nothing changed," Bruce said. "I kept working. Eventually the work was too loud to ignore." Carson asked him, near the end of the segment, about the philosophy behind all of it, whether there was something underneath the fighting that people missed when they only saw the speed. "Water can flow, or it can crash," Bruce said. "Same water, different circumstance. That's the whole idea. Not to be hard all the time, not to be soft all the time, to be whatever the moment requires, and nothing more." It was not the joke Carson had planned for, and not the answer the audience had expected either, but it landed with the particular weight of something true, and the room quieted to listen to the rest of it. "Let me ask you something else then," Carson said, and there was no performance left in his voice at all now, just plain curiosity. "You've had doors closed on you for years in this country. Tonight, in front of all these people, you could have made me look foolish. You had every reason to. Why didn't you?" Bruce considered the question for a moment before answering, the way he considered most things, not searching for the right words, exactly, but making sure he said only the ones that mattered. "Because that was never the point," he said. "If I only wanted to win, I could have done that from my chair without standing up. Making you look foolish doesn't teach you anything. It just makes me feel better for a few seconds, and then we're both worse off than before. I'd rather you actually understand something by the end of the segment than just remember losing to me. Those aren't the same thing, even if they look similar from the outside." Carson sat with that for a second, then nodded slowly, the way a man nods when he has just been handed something heavier than he expected in a conversation that started as a joke. "That might be the most sensible thing anyone said in this chair all year," he said, and the audience laughed again, warmly this time, the whole room clearly on Bruce's side by now in a way it had not been 10 minutes earlier. After the taping, in the corridor outside the studio, a producer reportedly told Carson the physical demonstration would need a note in the edit before broadcast. Nothing had been formally cleared with the network's insurance department for a guest to physically engage the host on air, however lightly. Carson, still shaking his head slightly, is said to have laughed and told him some things were worth a little paperwork. Bruce, changing out of his jacket in the same green room, where he had waited that evening, was approached by one of the stagehands, a heavy-set man who had worked the show for years and had seen every kind of guest come through that curtain. "I've watched a lot of people sit in that chair," the stagehand said. "Never seen anybody make Johnny go quiet like that." Bruce only nodded, folding his jacket over his arm. He wasn't wrong to ask the question, he said. "Most people wonder the same thing. I'd rather be asked to my face than have people wonder quietly forever." Bruce Lee never got to see how Enter the Dragon changed everything a few weeks later, when it opened across the country and turned him, almost overnight, into the biggest martial arts star the West had ever seen. He never got a second Tonight Show appearance, or a third, or the long career in American film that the moment seemed to promise. But the people who sat in that studio audience on that August night, and the crew who worked the cameras, and the stagehand who folded chairs long after everyone else had gone home, told the story for years afterward, embellishing it a little more each time it was retold, the way any good story grows in the telling, until it settled into the shape of legend. The night a talk show host reached for an easy joke at a guest's expense, and instead received, calmly and without a trace of anger, a lesson in exactly what real control looks like. Some who were there swore Carson brought it up himself, years later, at dinner parties, always ending the story the same way. "I've never been more glad to lose an argument in 30 seconds. Others say the exchange was trimmed for broadcast and only ever survived as something people who'd been in that room described to friends, a piece of studio folklore rather than a segment anyone could actually rewatch, which is, perhaps, exactly why the story kept growing rather than fading. The way things people can't quite verify tend to take on a life of their own. What everyone who told the story agreed on was the shape of it. A room that laughed at him for 5 seconds, and then, for the rest of the hour, listened to him instead. Not because he had proven he could hurt someone, because he had proven, calmly and completely, that he never needed to. In the years that followed, as Bruce Lee's films found the audience that had eluded him in life, the story of that night took on the particular quality that legends take on once the person at the center of them is no longer around to confirm or deny the details. Martial arts students who never met him would repeat it to newer students as a kind of parable, less concerned with whether it had happened exactly that way, and more concerned with what it was supposed to teach. That real skill does not need to announce itself, that the calmest person in the room is often the most dangerous one, and that the best response to being underestimated is rarely anger. A few who claim to have been in that studio audience gave interviews decades later, each remembering slightly different details. Some placed the demonstration earlier in the segment, some later. Some remembered Carson laughing immediately. Others remembered a longer, more uncomfortable silence before the room found its footing again. That kind of drift is exactly what happens to any story passed mouth to mouth long enough, true or not. And by the time it had been told a few hundred times at dinner parties and dojo potlucks, the differences mattered less than the shape everyone agreed on. Bruce's own students, in the years after his death, were sometimes asked whether he had ever mentioned the night himself. Most said he rarely talked about his own accomplishments unprompted, that if you wanted to hear about it, you generally had to ask, and even then he would tell it briefly, almost dismissively, more interested in whatever lesson could be pulled out of it than in dwelling on the moment itself. He didn't think it made him special, one former student is said to have recalled. He thought it proved something about training, not about him personally. He always tried to point the story away from himself and toward the work. Whether every detail of that August night happened exactly as it has come down through the retellings, or whether, like so many stories that outlive the people at their center, it grew a little truer to the legend than to the record with each passing year, the version that survived carried the same lesson every time, that the loudest person in the room is rarely the most dangerous one, and that real mastery, when it finally shows itself, tends to do so quietly, and only for as long as it takes, to make the point.